very first time I saw our books together, I rushed to Malaprops, this very beautiful and wonderful independent bookstore that is in downtown Asheville. And I was delighted and burst into tears. And I'm feeling the same thing now. Can you imagine being a mother of a daughter who grows up to write a book and they're in the same bookstore? So, and here we are on the same couch. Calla.
Very exciting. Yes, no, and I'm very, very grateful. My mother is also the person who edited my book in its early stages, and is also maybe the reason I believed I could write a book, because she took me seriously. And I think that's something also that my parents have always done. They've taken me seriously in all my idiotic pursuits. And that goes as well to my creative partner, Max Pitegoff's parents, who have let us make lots of bad decisions, including opening theaters and bars in Berlin. And a lot of that work shows up here in other people's clothes. And so I'm very grateful to all of their support and very happy that we get to be here today to celebrate the book coming out. So I'm going to dive in, and I'm just going to read a little short chunk, just 2 paragraphs that I think describe our main character, Haley. I mean, the main character is Zoe, but we're adapting the book for TV, which is so exciting. But you realize that Zoe, the main character, is a lens for Haley. And she's a character that is so fun to watch through the main character, Zoe. So I'm going to jump into reading a bit about how she sees this toxic friendship. Freezing, I jammed my hands into my pockets and discovered the Polaroid of Haley playing piano at the hotel. I stopped on the sidewalk and stared at it. There was something about her body cast in emulsion that made you want more. She wasn't a supermodel in the infinity pool of capitalism, that quicksilver that made purchases seem inevitable and easy. No, she inhabited a stranger's space. She had the smile of the debutante in dirty pictures, a Midwestern mall model, an actress whose lines were written on her hands. She was just barely out of reach, and that made her even more desirable. I turned into the Speckhof near our apartment and laid the Polaroid on the glass bed of the ancient black and white Xerox machine. I blew Haley up and shrank her down, making copies of copies, disintegrating her smile. When I got home, Haley was gone. I closed my door and laid out the black and white versions of her on the floor and took out my scissors. Maybe it was the weed she'd just smoked. The trance came easy. I cut her thighs into round shapes, her arched feet into spiked triangles, her gold bikini into glitz diamonds. I filled in the green space of the collage with the silvery plains of Haley's skin. The Dada groceries now barely visible, their bright colors peeking out in splinters like lost punchlines. It felt good. When I was done, I rolled up the collage and stuck it behind my bed. I didn't want Haley to know. So I think a lot of the book deals with kind of the inspiration and ways we borrow things from friends and the way we look at each other. And yes, so that's a little view into how Zoe sees her roommate, Haley. And the book is set in Berlin and follows 2 girls who are on exchange. And to give a little background, they stumble on a sublet, and it turns out to be from a famous thriller writer. And the girls move in, they feel like they've won the lottery. It's beautiful. And I too moved into an apartment like this. And it turns out that they soon realize this thriller writer is watching them, and her next book appears to be about them. And the girls take stock of their very mundane existence, and they decide that they should turn themselves into characters who are worthy of being in a novel. And so they start performing for her. So the whole thing is sort of about this kind of performance and how you control and star in your own narrative. And it's a period piece because it's set in 2008, and now that's the past. So I will, after giving my brief introduction to my novel, hand it over to my mother, who knows me, Fiona, more than anyone
Yeah,
else.
I didn't know what piece she was going to read first, so she starts reading about collage, and that, of course, is dear to my heart. All the books I have ever made are cutting tiny pieces with paper and putting them back together again. But I did go into our historical file and pull out some pictures. So this is Calla in 6th grade, and there she is with all the collages all over the walls that you can see how this has been a theme in her life since the beginning. And my job tonight is to be here for somebody who's known since the beginning. And the other thing that I can say about her as her mom is she has always had this kind of tenaciousness that is startling to anyone, not just her mom. But she has dyslexia and struggled in school all those years. And my job was to work next to her and see if I could untangle things. And it was slow if you compare it to other people, but she did eventually untangle language. Math, hopeless, but language. And I just want to show you what that looks like. And so here is Calla struggling with her homework. And can you see that furrow in her brow there? She is really struggling. She's sitting at a table in Florida that is ground to bits, and here with other people struggle. And here I am sitting next to her as we slowly plod through untangling how language reels across the page. And she had this peculiar way with adjectives. She never really used them as everyone else does. And early on, Jim, my husband, and I just decided we're just going to let her go with this. And that's what you'll find in this book over and over again. So I would just want to say she grew up with artists, and you came out of college as an artist, and yet you wrote a book. And it still astonishes me, but I'm just wondering, how does being an artist influence how and what you write about?
Well, I think because Other People's Clothes follows two girls who are art students, the idea of kind of what it means to be an artist is processed through the whole book. And it sort of is a pool filter for the questioning I think one has when you're trying to decide. I mean, being an artist is an absurd thing in itself, and it's a grand statement. And I think the girls both have to deal with what that means and what it means to also go to a new place and establish themselves and kind of have the confidence to say, I'm an artist and this is what I make. And so I think a lot of my own developments, and also I think I'm really interested in working with lots of different materials and processes. And I think sometimes people are like, well, you're an artist, you can't make theater. And I think there's these sort of, maybe especially in Germany, but they really like divisions between craft. And so I think for me, the book is very fun because it gets to take all of these pieces that I'm interested in and put them together. And I think Haley, this character in the book, who's so performative and so aware of what it means to perform, kind of to represent what it means to perform, to represent her own identity. I think her kind of processing of performance comes from my relationship and interest in theater and kind of what happens when that imprints in your own kind of life. And I think Zoe's relationship to collage and kind of trying to find a whole from many pieces also comes from different parts of my, I think that was much more of my like preteen self. But so I think many aspects of me processing kind of the world through art is in the book, which is fun and also embarrassing. And yeah, and a lot of my favorite artists are also in there. So I feel like in a weird way, the novel form was the most generous format to bring everything together.
And what about, you start the novel with life in college. Is that an accurate report?
Yeah, it's funny. I was really, because the book really, it starts at a fictive arts college, and I went to art school. I went to Cooper Union in New York, and It was very, very intense and very, very macho for the time period I was there. It was like extremely male dominated in the sculpture department. And when I sat down to write the book, I realized how intense and traumatized is the wrong word, but kind of like how that had also impacted what I made. Because you're in these sort of hyperloops of conversations and having to defend your work and critiques. And I think processing also that time period was very interesting and important for me. And it's funny because now a lot of people who I went to school with read it and they're like, yeah, it was really messed up. So I think, but it didn't seem like that back. So I think a lot has been unpacked kind of in writing it that I didn't see until I was sitting behind the computer. So.
Well, Calla she moved to Berlin, and we would get phone calls from Berlin telling us about what was happening. And one of my favorites was she called to say that she had been to the opera costume sale. And it was one of the greatest stories ever. And to find that story in this book, I wanted you to hear it tonight, because and imagine hearing the description as the mom, who is her own performance compulsion as she describes it. So let's hear it. Let's hear a bit of that.
Okay. So as Mother said, this is a chunk. This is after the girls have discovered that they're being watched and they realize that they truly have a boring life and they need to sort of perform a better version of themselves for this author so that they can kind of control their story. And so if we were going to build a new frame for our narrative, we thought we should also work on our performances. Haley had naturally done improv workshops in high school. The first rule of improv is never say no to another actor. Instead, you say yes and. It allows for the scene to never get shut down. We'd just finished a gruesome Law and Order, so my mind was in the gutter. What if someone in improv says, I want to rape you? She didn't miss a beat. You could say, yes, and now I'm going to get into my time machine and kill you before you rape me. I stared at her. Wow. The theatricality of our new lives was rapidly building. The Russian girl in Klaus's class had mentioned there was a costume sale at the Deutsche Oper, and she'd warned us to go early because it got crowded. Haley and I found a long, quiet queue already wrapped around the brick building an hour before the doors opened at 10 a.m. This must be it, I muttered. Haley held our place in line while I traipsed off into the statuesque slice of Charlottenburg to find caffeine. When I returned, Haley filled me in on the history lesson the tall woman in front of us had given. Apparently, the opera does this every year, and things range from €5 to 400. There are pieces from historical operas as well as more contemporary. She suggested we make a pile, which we trade off protecting. She said it can get a bit nasty. As soon as the doors opened, we knew our budget of €100 was too small. Mustard-colored fatsuits hung next to brocade ball gowns and ancient cupcake tutus. The bundled forms that had been patiently lined up had now aggressively thrown down their jackets to stake small plots of wall space. This feels like supermarket sweep, Haley said, pausing to relish the intensity of the room. My aunt was on the show. She said all the food was fake and gross. It's shot in a warehouse, and they reused the food for each episode. I had never watched it, but I recognized the prosumer athleticism in the crowd around us. A mix of Renaissance festival girls lacing each other up in corsets, serious seamstresses inspecting zippers, club kids looking for gear, those interested only in resale value, and us. We began fondling lace fabrics and gargantuan feathered sleeves, trying to ascertain what or who it was we wanted to be in our hypothetical novel. I was magnetically pulled toward a slippery golden dress that burst into sequined flames, replete with a shawl of woven gold laurel. I slipped the dress under my jacket in the corner, our pile commenced. Haley tried on an emerald green dress with a hoop skirt. I found a rack of chainmail, selecting a long-sleeved silver sheath. Haley pulled 2 matching David Bowie-esque light blue suits. Competing against one of the more diligent seamstresses, I had narrowly gotten my hands on a light pink suit with a stiff cream Elizabethan collar and matching flamingo feathered shoes. The last costume Haley picked was a black bustle dress that made her the lead contender for the madame of the sleaziest brothel in the Old West. "This is it," she squealed. We added up all our precious items together, totaling $380. Haley had the idea to peel the tags off the more expensive pieces and take our chances with whatever prices the old ladies at the register would make up. When they rang us in at $160, Haley shot me a look of deserved pride. On the train, with our garments packed tightly into white garbage bags, we sat like two proud chickens protecting their eggs. At home, we laid each costume out on the floor and then began an elaborate fashion show. After the Polaroid collage, I knew I wanted to use Haley's image again, but this time I'd get her consent. I nervously asked her to pose. She agreed, babbling about her teenage model years, lying back on the lip couch, her freckled legs climbing arrogantly out of the black bustle dress. She was a natural. When Haley went to the bathroom, I looked through the images, zooming into the display at her contorting body, wondering what shapes I wanted to cut from her. "Hard to pee in a hoop skirt," Haley called from the door of the bathroom. I put my camera down, still dressed in chainmail. I added another brick to my fire, watching the wedge of marshmallowy kerosene burst into an apocalyptic blaze. I sensed our literary transformations had truly begun.
You have to admit, it's pretty startling that you sent off an artist and this starts coming out of her mouth. So she'd come home for the holidays and she slept in one of our studios. Calla's father, my husband, is a very well-known photographer. And so she's always had studios, and we gave her her own studio when she was 4 years old. And she grew up thinking everybody had a studio. So how did this happen? That's what I asked myself. How did this happen? So that's a question I'm going to ask her on the spot right now. How did you go from Cooper Union artist to a novel writer? What happened?
Well, I think that a good art school turns you into almost a lawyer, and what you become good at is defending yourself. And so you just learn how to talk. And that's pretty much, I mean, I also learned how to build things, but at Cooper Union, you just learn how to talk. And I think for me, I already had some writing in my blood, but I think this kind of relationship to thinking about language and kind of describing work and how you work. I also, when I work with Max Pitegoff, we write a lot, and kind of all of this writing was getting longer and longer, and we were working on plays, and then we were working on longer plays and bigger plays. And then I think I wanted to see if I could, because I think it's also a muscle, and I think writing long form is really, really different than short. And it's funny, now I can barely write something short because the kind of jokes and kind of threads and things that you can pull through when you have a really long text are so much more complicated, and I think actually lend themselves more to theater, where you can sit through an hour and this thing that happened at the beginning comes back here. And so I think it does have a lot to do with theater, but it also has to do with kind of this belief in kind of putting work into language, which I learned at school.
Well, you did get a question from our friend, a friend in Minnesota, Pamela. Did using your imagination become a fluid part of writing, or do you plot and struggle with the process? Do you outline or plot as you go as you're writing? How does it work?
It would be so smart to outline. It would just be like, I would love to be one of those people. And like, we've watched, Mom likes master classes, and because she can't handle narrative tension, believe it or not. And so we would watch these we watched the Dan Brown masterclass, and he was like, you just plot it all out. And I was like, yeah, you just plot it. I can't do it. I could, I tried. I can't do it. I like this thing where you surprise yourself. And it's sort of fun with a thriller. You can also scare yourself. It's like you just, so for me, I think you have to get into the flow and get with it. And then sometimes I can now be like, I think this has to happen, this has to happen. But no, sadly not yet. Maybe next time I'll join the Brown School of Plotting.
Well, I do want to say that the whole family has had a little thumbprint on this, in that Calla would come up and tell us what she had recently written, and Jim, who's a great plotter, would come up with suggestions, and then later she started sending me chapters, and the chapters started writing, and I just went up to my studio and got, this is just a partial.
I wasn't joking when I said my mother was the original editor.
Yes. So, but these are various printings. I'm old fashioned, so I need to see it on paper. So I would take it to a copy center and print it off. And first it was costing me $15. And by the time I did the last one, it was $65 to make this full three-dimensional thing you could write on process. But you can see from that picture I showed you from early on that we had a unique relationship, in that I don't know that every mother and daughter could work editorially, but she trusted me that I was on her team. I'm not trying to do anything or to make her any better or worse, just try to mostly weed commas. I have like an attic filled with Calla's extra commas. And slowly but surely it got richer and richer. But I wasn't the only person working in that editorial circle. And I think anybody who writes, you really need a circle of trusted readers. And that's what you've been very good at developing. People who come at it with different strengths and look at it and offer suggestions. And because of this peculiar tenacity that I mentioned earlier, she really has the ability to pick through what she wants and not offend the giver, but be very much herself about taking what you.
But I also got very lucky, and my work, my artistic work, and my life is very collaborative. And I run these spaces, and there's always people around. And I started out writing plays, and I think so there's always people around, and you're writing language for them. And then I think these people just stayed in my brain. And so that's sort of how I write dialogue, is to a room full of my friends. And that's very much what this book is. And I got very lucky that a lot of these friends were willing to read the book very early on. The girl who I moved to Berlin with is my best friend. And I'm just so, I hope her mom is watching tonight. So we moved together to Berlin, much like what happens in here. So I borrowed a lot of her and I's timeline. And I gutted the timeline of Most Truth. And so I handed my very early manuscript to Mia, my friend, and I was like, you have to read this. This is not you, and this is not me. And she was very, very generous in being like, just go for it. Do it. And so she gave me great edits and was also very supportive of it. And same with Max Pitegoff and my friend Alex Scrimgeour. And so I had all of these friends who had different kind of relationships to writing and reading and art. And also if something was like corny or not cool, they would be like, oh, this would never happen at Berghain or whatever, it's like, I was like, oh, you're right. But my favorite was some of the way I farmed stories is I would wait till we were all out at our favorite restaurant, Il Casolare. And I would say like, so who's got the worst rejection story from Berghain? And then we would all go around and share our stories.
Wait, so what is Berghain?
Berghain is this large club in Berlin, which the girls try and get into. It's not a spoiler, unsuccessfully. And it's a club that many people don't get into successfully, even those of us who live in Berlin and go often. So the kind of trauma of not getting in is a widespread lore. And but this is a mashup of several people's stories, and they're real that are in here. So in a lot of ways, it is a solo activity to be writing and kind of be on your own, putting a story together. But I'm very lucky that I feel like a lot of people are rattling around in it in a very real way. And yeah.
But also you've been very lucky in that the friends you've cultivated would say, you would say, would you please read this novel? And a first novel, nobody's really jumping
Yeah,
up and
no.
down to read somebody's first novel. And they read it, and there's a marvelous thank you acknowledgments in the back of this that really goes back to thank the artists she grew up with, as well as the current peers and colleagues that helped in those early readings. So if you yourself are ready to write a novel, please do cultivate a group of those trusted readers who can help you honestly respond to it.
Or
So-
just send it to Debra.
No,
I'll give you her email. It's great. She's wonderful. But I also had amazing editors at Doubleday and at Scepter in London. And so it was very fun. And also interesting, you know, after you go through your friends editing it, your mom editing it, then you have someone who's like, we're going to get this into real shape. So there was a lot of learning because I didn't know how to do any of that in this novel. And I think also a thriller format is interesting because I always see it as a poetic math problem. And as you now know, I can't do math. But I think I was able to solve this. But it's interesting because it does all have to add up in the end. That's what I mean by that. There's sort of someone had to have done something. So there's this, I think, thrill to watching all of those pieces come together, which has been fun.
Let's hear another piece of it.
I didn't have another one.
Oh.
No. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I'm really interested in geography and how it permeates this book. We jump from place to place as we go span history, and they're similar to places that you lived. How is that what you did? You just went back?
I think for me, I think you have to write what you know. I mean, I hope that's not always true. I think for me, because I'd never written before, I really had to pull from what I knew. And so that is part of the reason it takes place in all of those places. But I also think for me, Florida is just the most amazing backdrop for any story. I think Florida Man, the whole like meme of what that is, it's a sort of green screen for wildness. And so in a way, I'm very grateful that we moved there because I feel like every story I write from here on out will take place in part in Florida. So thank you for that.
Calla was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, and so is pretty winter hardy. I, on the other hand, fourth generation Floridian, had no idea how to raise a kid in the winter. But we were very lucky, and we moved to a house that next door was a house with an extraordinary library. And I don't know, we could have an evening like this without a tip of the hat to our neighbors, the Steins, Jerry and Margie, and all their children who loved books in a devoted way. And it was where I took a late version of On the Day You Were Born to read to them before it was actually a book. And they later told me that they told the kids to please be nice no matter what. And it turned out they liked the book, and it started a long relationship. And Jerry went on to read, as he did to all his children, The Hobbit to Calla out loud, counting her as one of the kids. And we were lucky enough to cultivate that through our whole 30 years living in Minnesota. And then to have Margie be one of the trusted readers of an early version of this very book. So I have to say we were lucky enough to grow up together as a family in a culture of books. And this is a perfect time for me to say that Malaprop will be selling Calla's book through a link, and she will be adding something special to any book purchased at Malaprop's. And it's not just any bookstore. This is an independent bookstore that has remained strong throughout everything we faced in the last couple of years. And
if you buy a copy of other people's clothes at Malaprop's, you will also get a drink ticket for a drink of your choice at TV Bar in Berlin. It does not include the airfare, but know that. So support them, Malaprop's forever. I found a little section to read from.
Let's hear it.
A little embarrassed with this in front of my mom, but I'm gonna go for it. I had always been annoyed by the pressure of New Year's Eve, but the battle-ready rollicking of the city made me feel up to the challenge. A new year, a new war. I was thankful I'd worn my knee-high Wyoming riding boots as I waded through cartridges and broken bottles. The party was in an old 19th century horse stable that had been converted into studios. It cost 10 euros to get in. The techno was thudding and crashing. It sounded like being in a submarine during a storm. The Croatian dancer from the Star Wars bar was selling shots with 2 big duct tape X's over her tits. We hugged. She gave me tequila in a plastic cup, and I found a corner to stash my coat. Above the DJ booth, an image of a snake eating its own tail was drawn out in plastic tube lighting. Devin, the Marxist, greeted me with a monster's grin and placed a pill of ecstasy into my palm with his wet fingers. He winked, too high to talk. I thanked him and lumbered off, his eyebrows fused to his scalp in a look of surprise. I felt the shape of the oval, wondering briefly if it was a sleeping pill, which Haley had given to some people earlier, telling them it was ecstasy. It wasn't. Then swept it down with a spike of tequila. 20 minutes later, the light in the space started to feel thick and watery. My jaw began careening back and forth. Every sweaty body was a tropical island, everyone existing in their own libertarian state of bliss. I felt truly happy, my brain riding the cresting waves of serotonin. I let myself go and closed my eyes. A girl with shaved head bumped into me. She seemed to be on the same stuff. We grinned at each other. This was our island. She slid her hands down my butt while we danced. I ran my hands through her fuzz. It was the nicest thing I had ever touched. She kissed me. Her tongue was warm and wet, and her mouth felt as though I were hopping into a perfect bath. Every inch of my body felt good. The shaved head kept disappearing into the crowd, then returning to make out. It felt like Christmas morning every time she reappeared. When my feet became heavy, I searched for the shaved head. She was nowhere. The duct tape X's had long removed themselves from the Croatian girl's tits, and she was throwing bottles against the back wall, screaming as each glass orb burst. She didn't hear me say goodbye. Sifting through the tired morning light, the city seemed exhausted. Everyone on the streets still drunk, tinsel spilling from trash cans like the evening's charred intestines. I was tingling. My skeleton felt like it was still on the dance floor, still grinding. Haley wasn't home yet. I had a pang of resentment that she was still out, still going. I made my fire, then went into her room to check on hers. I sat on her bed and noticed for the first time that the molding was made of little roses connecting and reconnecting infinitely, same as the snake eating itself at the party.
Whoa. Well, thanks, Cal.
A little bit of Berlin party for my parents on their couch.
So where did you find time in your life to make the kind of commitment to write something like this? This question comes in from Pamela again, so
Hi,
thank
Pamela.
you.
Thank you. I really love writing, and I can do it anywhere. So I don't need to do the thing where you're like, I'm going to a cabin in the woods, which I can, sometimes do, but I can write at the airport, I can write in line, I can write in the notes app, and I can write on my computer. So I think for me, it was just about committing to the story, and then the story is always with you. And I'm working on a new novel right now, and there's this girl, she's the character, and I sort of have this feeling that I've stood her up, and she's just like waiting for me at a bar with a cigarette because I'm not with her. So I think for me, it's more also this thing that you carry these stories and characters with you, and kind of everything becomes a magnet, in my life. I also write down lines people say all the time. So I'm like, oh, that's good. That's perfect. That's just what they would say. So yeah.
So are there any, I know you're a big fan of Patricia Highsmith. Do you have any other books that have helped you on this path?
Yeah, I think Patricia Highsmith is really amazing, and I think I dip back into her very often. Renata Adler is I read Speedboat. It's really like a classic. It makes me seem basic, and I know that, but she's just such a genius. I got it for you, and you didn't like it. But there's something in her poeticism and how she talks and how there's a speed to her writing. And I find that whenever I'm sort of lost, I can pick up that book, or Michelle T, who's also really amazing. And she also, her kind of very important queer writing has been very helpful for me. And Laura Lippman, when I sort of feel like I can't, it's like when you're writing a thriller, there's the moment when like the knife is out. There's like, and I'm always like, can I write that? And then I'll read, she's like a very prolific writer in terms of this sort of thriller genre. So that's crime, really. So that's helpful. Yeah.
And humor, do you read any humor?
I mean, everything's funny. I don't know. I don't know if I read anything specifically humor related. I did actually. Girl Interrupted and The Bell Jar are set at the same mental hospital, which I thought was really spectacular, and I didn't know that. And I read both of those books back to back again, because part of this takes place in a sort of institution. But I love this idea that there are these like two stories. So I sort of set this book in a kind of fictional version of that same mental hospital. Yeah.
Well, I know when she was a kid, she loved reading Dave Barry and Carl Hyacin, and watching them take their stories from the Miami Herald and turn them into books was part of her youthful life. We also would make the trip from North Carolina to Minnesota and back again a couple of times during the year. And she would ride with her dad, often listening to CDs of books and
rented from Cracker Barrel.
Yes. And that was a way, I think, youthfully, she listened to a lot of mysteries surrounding a cat who could help solve things. And that she came home one summer and used the word ubiquitous, the ubiquitous white truck. So those of you who have kids, I would listen as you go along. You never know what'll happen. So Patricia, I wonder if you have any questions from people who have come from afar for us.
I am so glad you asked that, because we have some questions and I have some questions too. So I'm very excited to be able to talk more. First of all, this was something that we talked about before the event got started. From Kelly Thomas, please tell us about the cover art. Please give us and I'm adding this, please give us the scoop and tell us about that Instagram account from Doubleday, or posting from Doubleday.
The brilliant Emily Mahon, who does a lot of the covers for Doubleday, did this cover, and I feel extraordinarily lucky because it's so striking. And I think we had gone back and forth kind of about what it should look like, and they sent me this, and at one point I had thought it should have more complicated hair. So they sent me versions of it with a ponytail and versions of it long, and then we all realized it should look exactly as it was. And then I was like, wait, it needs to look like Warhol. And then we added in these, the kind of colorings on it. So it went through many phases, but I feel extraordinarily lucky that they were so sharp in it and my ideas were rejected because they were right all along. So.
And you can find a series of 10 of these images at the Doubleday Instagram account, and just scroll through till you find Cal's cover, and it'll take you backwards, because she starts by taking the collage idea and building a collage for the cover. And it's good, but it's not dynamic like what you get at the end. And it's just so interesting to watch the process unfold in another designer's life.
Yeah, she really did such a brilliant job.
It is really striking, and that's so wonderful to be able to know behind the scenes more about that process. And a lot of our audience members, myself included, love process stories and detours and disasters and successes. So this is certainly a great success. We have another question from Vorticity 4, which I'm glad we've got this question. Did you know where the end of the story was before you began?
Oh, no. That was absolutely not. This is again a sort of this thing where I think it would be great if I had the Dan Brown cards taped to my wall, but no, I deleted probably 60% of the novel, which I don't think I would ever do again because I didn't know where I was going. And I also didn't know how to write a novel. So there's many drafts in the beginning. And so I didn't even know I could write an end. That seemed like a huge mystery. So the very ending, which is definitely a cliffhanger of sorts, I did not know until I was almost done. So that was great.
Well, I am a huge fan of Susanna Kayson's Girl Interrupted.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
It's a touchstone book for me. And so when you mentioned it in your influences, I'm just over the moon with it because I wish everybody could take a look at that book and see just the structure of it. So this is a segue into a structure question and a revisions question folded in. How did you address the issue of structuring your story? And then what was the revisions process like for you?
I think in terms of structuring it, I would never work the way I did again, where I just sat down and started thinking about what it was like to go abroad during this time period. And so I started in a very abstract way. And then the revision was really being like, where is this story going, and chopping it up and kind of realizing as I figured out exactly what the thriller would be, kind of how I had to reshape it.
And so was this agonizing? Are you a suffering novelist, or are you
No, I love
invigorated by
getting
it?
edited. I'm such a pervert for it. It's like, I think because I work collectively and collaboratively so often, I think it's like, it's a love language. When someone hands you, like Lee Boudreau at Doubleday, she sent me this big stack in a DHL box to Berlin, and I opened it, and she had edited it with a tiny pencil and all this language. And it was like, I don't know. I mean, it was terrifying, but so exciting. And I was very greedy for it, so excited that she was taking the time to really get to the core of each sentence and word and moment and beat. And I really needed it. And so for me, it's definitely not suffering in terms of that. I love a critic.
How did you get this book published? What were the steps from I'm writing a novel to it's
I
going to
was
be
really
published?
hoping that nepotism would help in this, but it
No
didn't.
such luck.
No such luck, no, it's actually fabulous that it really, mom knew someone, they sent it to it, they rejected it. So I had one rejection quite off the bat, and I was like, okay, whatever, maybe I'll just print this and sell it at the copy shop that they use in the book in Berlin. And I was like, that's my backup plan. And then my friend Alex Scrimger, who's a really brilliant editor and writer, had agreed to look at it, and he had a copy of it in his pocket already all scrapped up. He's a very kind of messy, many-sided writing kind of guy. And he saw a friend of his, Eleanor Bierna, who's an agent, and he handed it to her. And she read it, and she wrote me like a week later and was like, let's do it. So, and she helped me get it kind of to the shape it needed to be in. So it was a very relatively painless process, which I know is not the normal process. So it was very exciting. I'm very grateful for all the friends who kind of had that tumble into shape.
When you're thinking about your next work that you mentioned, it sounds to me like you're not going to do it the same way. Is that by design, or is that because you're just saying this is a different book, it requires a different process?
I think I just have more confidence, and I learned so much in sort of processing all of the notes from everyone, and kind of understanding also like how you leave a scene, and how also the chapters are shorter. There's all these things that I didn't even know were thoughts, because I was just, so it's interesting. For me, it's a different process because I have more knowledge of it. But I think there's also, that has given me more joy in writing, because I'm just able to like let loose, rather than kind of be like, can I do this? How do you do this? And I did so much reading of other books to try and learn how to write this. So there was so much back and forth. So I think I have a bit more confidence to just move forward, which is nice.
Well, I watch a lot of TV, and Baby Ballroom is one of my recent Netflix
Oh,
favorites out of England. And one of the things that they say is that confidence is so important, and that success breeds that confidence to take more risks, but also to know what you want to do. And the
yeah.
way you were describing, like your character waiting, smoking the cigarette, waiting for you to come back and pick her up at the train station because you left her there.
Yeah.
I love that image.
Yeah, well, it's true. And I feel like she's like angry at this point, and kind of every day I leave her there, I know it's a little bit more. But then I think she's an angry character, so it
Right.
works.
You're not going to be able to win. She's with an angry character, which is good, but
It's
I put her,
good. I mean,
yes.
my characters are never that likable. It's something I think they're likable in their deep beliefs in themselves, but not in their general disposition. I don't know.
I have to say, I put your character at the train station. I don't think you said that, but that's just me thinking about
I left her
Berlin.
at the bar. It's fine. Same
You
place.
left her at the bar. Okay, fair enough. Well, there's a lot of debate about likable characters these days, especially for those of us, like I said, who watch a lot of TV, and that show Succession on HBO.
Oh, yeah, it's super interesting.
And what do you think about that whole debate about characters need to be likable, people need to have sympathy or empathy for a character? What's your hot take on that?
My hot take is I really believe even unlikable characters, there's a piece of them that's likable. And that's what becomes interesting with something like Succession, where you have a kaleidoscope of people shifting, and all of a sudden you see the likable piece behind. So, it's like all about how they interact and mirror from each other. So I think as long as you kind of have dynamicism between unlikable people, they can kind of reveal the sides that are likable and are maybe vulnerable or naive in ways that they don't present themselves straightforward.
And isn't it great when the character that you start to sympathize with does just something that is like, wow, that was wrong. You're, wow, bad.
Yeah, Tom.
I love that.
Yeah. And I mean, the writing on that show is also just so spectacular. I think it's such a nice moment of kind of getting to watch the golden era of TV.
I completely agree. As an avid TV watcher, I've hardly been more engaged than I was since I was a child, and it's been fantastic for me. We've got a question from Richard. You mentioned something about the TV version. So does this mean, where are you going with that? Tell us about it, please.
Yeah, so the rights to the book have been sold to Mark Gordon's company, who did Grey's Anatomy, which is super exciting. And they have an office in London and a wonderful producer named Beth, who's there. And we're working on it with Alexa Karolinsky, who did Unorthodox. And so it's a big process that I, again, know nothing about. And so I am, again, learning as we're going, and it's very fun. But when you do a movie, you take a lot out of a book. And when you do TV, you have to add a lot in, because everyone needs a kind of developed arc. So that's sort of what's exciting, as we get to kind of add into these girls' lives. They're not done, they're still smoking at the club, angry that we haven't figured out exactly what happened in the backstory of this or this. So it's exciting to watch it kind of continue to bubble, which is fun.
Did you ever see Fleabag?
I did, yes, it's very brilliant. Yeah.
I am always amazed by Fleabag and the arc of that and the choices in that. So I wonder if, as you're going through this process, the adaptation process, what kind of say do you have, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much in the room with them, which is super fun. And I think I'll be in the writer's room, so that's great. And I'm just kind of learning as I go. But I also love dialogue and language, so I care a lot. And I'm like, I want these girls to be real. So I'm very in it, which is good. And I'm grateful that they're letting me be as in it as I am. So it's good.
So do you have a sense of timeline, or is this just too early?
No, I think the pilot's coming together. I think we'll take it out, and then you take it to a streamer. So we don't know where it will go, or hopefully if it goes. And I think that will happen, I think, in spring. So we'll see. And then we have to shoot it and write it, I guess.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, that's all. Just
Just
like that. No, so I think it'll be a while.
Next week. Next week. One of the things that really cracked me up in your conversation with your mother was the mentioning of masterclass. And I'm a fan of masterclass.
I'm
Okay,
here
so
for it. Yeah.
I'm totally dedicated. Finished Margaret Atwood.
Oh, that was a
Finished
great one.
finishing up Joyce Carol Oates. I don't know if you ever read Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? But I'm a big fan of her, and that is a dark short story that I just love, and I know a lot of people do. So what do you make of this kind of the popularization of the author's craft? Do you think what do you think of that?
Well, I think it's funny because like I didn't know anything about being a writer, and then the book sort of started happening. And so I wrote my friend Elvia Wilk, who is a brilliant writer and also kind of started in the art world, but now she's very much a writer. And I was like, what? Like, I'm writing to ask you, like, what's it like? She was like, all they ask you is like where you write and how you write. And so I think it is this very like interesting obsession with this kind of like praxis behind how, maybe that's what you're asking, but this.
It is.
And I don't, it's very funny to me, but maybe that's all you've got when you're a writer, you know, because it's like there's not so much glamour to writing. So it's like you have to come up with like on a treadmill by the beach on only on rainy nights. I don't know. It's a very just I open my laptop wherever I am.
But you have headphones.
I do, but I actually, I do. I have noise canceling headphones, which enable me to work in the bar.
I think it's true. I mean, unless you kind of build a mythology around your craft, like Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of who I think of, and that documentary that came out about him was sort of meant to deconstruct him some. But I think, yeah, we are fascinated by what seems to be very interior and mysterious, and we can't tell what you're doing when we're just looking at you other than watching you write.
Yeah, so I think you have to construct the narrative. I should work on it. You know, I should come up with a better story.
You got to have some props.
Yeah, I'll have some props. Yeah, other than just my support for Malaprops.
Which we appreciate.
Yeah.
Prop that is the Malaprops. We appreciate that, and I couldn't let that go. But yeah, I definitely think it seems mysterious how you do what you do, and so Masterclass was a real revelation. And I did love the Margaret Atwood one. She's very subversive.
Really,
and I really appreciated that. I haven't watched Dan Brown yet, but I will.
I mean, it's a trip. He's sitting on a throne talking about his process.
Of
but
course he is.
Yeah, of course he is, which is great. I mean, I learned a lot. I'm not
and Issa Rae. I mean,
and also Shonda Rhimes. That was the other one I think I learned the most from. And she really has a lot. I think if you're a writer thinking about narrative and structure and beat and tempo, it's super interesting to dip into TV in the same way that I think it's interesting to dip into theater, because they have these different ways of processing speed and language and kind of what needs to be said and what doesn't.
Well, since you're in Germany, I have to reference, of course, since this is a digression from the masterclass, but Werner Herzog is one of my all-time favorite documentary filmmakers and human beings. And so I must tip the hat, like your mother mentioned, tip hats. We must tip hats to the people
and
that
Fassbinder. I really think the girls in this book kind of imagine that they're in a Fassbinder moment, you know, and that's these parties or this kind of very constructive wildness that is very built, but at the same time very believable. And I also think German theater and Brecht, and there's this kind of, they go to the Volksbühne in the book, and so there's this relationship, I think, to the construction of wildness that I also think that kind of like German directors have a kind of hold on that is very spectacular. So many hats tipped to those.
I love Berlin. I'm sorry, were you about to say something, Deborah?
No, good. Great.
Deborah, we know you're there. We see your arm.
I know, I am here, but I want you to see my shining daughter here. But I also know we're running close on time, and I want to make my last pitch for Malaprops. I have a friend whose name is Anne, and one of her COVID responsibilities, because we all know you can find a book dirt cheap other places. We won't say those other places, but these people who run independent bookstores in a network across the United States are our lighthouses. And I want you to think of it wherever you are, Malaprops or not, but wherever there's an independent bookstore, that these lighthouses have been flashing through the dark across us, linking piece by piece by piece our entire country together. It's where you'll find the books that are on banned lists right now. It's where you'll find other people speaking who might have another platform. You find the bestsellers that are out there. And by buying a book there, like my friend Anne, in her COVID project, she buys all her books from Malaprops, so that even though it's costing her a bit money more, she knows she's donating to this lighthouse of a store. So I hope you'll look at Malaprops, give them an order sometime in your life, if it's not this book, some other book. But this one, don't forget, comes with.
That's what I was gonna say.
Say.
A drink ticket for a beverage of your choice at TV Bar in Berlin, where I am the proprietor with Max Pitegoff. So if you can hightail it over there, kombucha mezcal, that's what I would suggest. Join us, yes. And yes, get the book at Malaprops. That's my
I
vote.
know. So, and I've had a lifetime in independent bookstores in those lighthouses across the country. And I cannot thank all of you enough who are out there, both as customers and as workers. It's made the difference for, I cannot tell you how many people in our country. So thank
Well,
you.
we're delighted to have this opportunity to celebrate Calla Henkel's book, her debut novel, Other People's Clothes.
Debut novel, can you believe that?
You know, if you could just dial it up to 11, Deborah, and take us into this is Spinal Tap zone, I would
Yeah.
really appreciate a little more enthusiasm. And that was Debra Frasier, everybody, the proud parent and author herself, heartily endorsing Other People's Clothes, her daughter, and independent bookstores like Malaprops. We really appreciate you attending this event this evening. Thank you all so much. Please take a look at our events calendar to see other events that you might be interested in, and have a great evening.
Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.